Last House on the Left. This will be a remake then.
Yes. Okay. Now, where to start with Last House on the Left? Well, let's start with the original. Back in the early 1970s, Last House on the Left was made by Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham. Wes Craven, because famously went on to make the Nightmare on Elm Street films and to become a very, very successful horror filmmaker, made the Scream series. Sean Cunningham, meanwhile, went on to make Friday the 13th. Last House on the Left was a very, very nasty, low-budget, unpleasant film that was essentially inspired by two things. One of them was the Ingmar Bergman film, The Virgin Spring. The second was TV footage of the Vietnam War. It was a sleazy exploitation movie that began life as a really sleazy grindhouse movie and kind of turned during its process into something else. The story is about two young girls who are kidnapped and raped and killed, and then the people who do the appalling crime then end up at the house of the parents of one of the girls, and retribution happens. And it's a very grim movie, and it's basically about the way that violence begets violence on one level. It is undoubtedly true. It was a film about making money. It was a classically an exploitation movie, but it had extraordinary sort of art house elements to it. When it first played in America, some people hated it so much that they broke into the projection box and cut the film up to stop it being projected. Now, it became a bête noire of the sense as it was involved in the Video Nasties list. It was one of the DPP's list of titles that were not to be shown. It was banned here for a very long time. And a very short story about it. A few years ago, they were trying to get it. It's now available uncut, but a few years ago they were trying to get it through uncut, and it wasn't. I was arguing that it ought to be allowed to be shown uncut because although it's a grim and a really nasty film, it was a historical artifact. And I wrote the BBFC were considering the case, and I wrote what was considered to be an academic defence of the film, saying, no matter what you think about it, it has status as a piece of history. It's a very important film in the evolution of American horror. And when we went into the hearing, the BBFC wanted to cut it by 16 seconds, and when we came out of the hearing after hearing my evidence, they doubled the cuts up to 32 seconds because my
what a great advocate you
exactly.
are. Get Mark on your side and lose twice. Anybody
want to be defended by me, believe me, I will send you down for life. So anyway, now the film has been remade in the, as is now traditional, taking every film that was made from the 1970s and remaking it in a slightly more stylish fashion. It's still got the involvement of Cunningham and Wes Craven, but it's been produced in a much slicker, much more sort of modern-looking package. The story, however, is essentially the same. It essentially ends up with parents faced with people who have committed a horrendous crime, which is slightly different in this version, and facing the prospect that they will become as violent as the people who are with them. Here's a clip.
We are going to get her to a hospital, okay? We are going to do this.
They're still here. What if they come over here?
I know. You're right. Which means we're going to be ready for anything. We have to be ready to do anything. You hear me?
We don't have a car. I mean, the nearest house is 6 miles from here. How are we?
By land. 6 miles by land. Okay, we're gonna do this. You with me? We're going to do it.
Now, the thing that I have to say is this. The original film was horrible and uneven and raggedy and disreputable and very, very important because of when it happened and because of what it was about. Wes Craven famously walked out of the first screening of Reservoir Dogs when it played at the Sitges Film Festival, and Quentin Tarantino said, I don't believe the guy who made Last House on the Left just walked out of my film. And I asked Craven about it. He said, well, the problem was that I felt that Last House was about something. It was about the way in which violence was being sold around the time of the Vietnam War, and it was about genre movies. When he watched Reservoir Dogs, he thought that the violence was just there for the sake of it. In the case of the remake, it is clearly a better made film than the original, in that it is better directed, it is better shot, they've ironed out some of the plot problems, because the plot in the original is very, very raggedy, although, as I said, it's inspired by the Bergman story. And they've done some sort of moving around of certain set pieces in order to just make it rather more smooth. And there's no denying the efficiency with which it is done. However, the question that I have is this. Why would you remake Last House on the Left in the first place? The obvious reason is clearly money. We are now in a period in which what you do with horror is you remake it. So as I said, all the Texas Chainsaw movies have all been sort of variously remade. We've seen remakes of all the sort of the 70s slashers. Recently My Bloody Valentine, which is an 80s slasher, was in cinemas. It's just a matter of working through the back catalogue. The problem with the new Last House is that although it's put together solidly, and although in many ways it's less sleazy and less reprehensible than the original, in fact, in one key plot point, it is less obnoxious than the original in that it sort of allows a certain element of salvation. The problem is this. The original is so horrible and so wretched and so nasty and so tough and so much a film which just says, can a movie ever go too far? And the question is, well, actually, you know what? Maybe it can. When you take the edges of it off, when you make it into a more efficient machine, when you solve the plot problems, when you put the thing together more convincingly, you're sort of left with, yeah, okay, but what's the point? And a classic example is, in the original film, there are these bizarre slapstick interludes because Craven and Cunningham, who didn't really know what they were doing, thought, after all this violence and horror, we ought to have some slapstick bits with some people in an overloaded truck and some chickens. Now, when you go back and look at Last House now, those bits are so wrong and so incongruous. Everything about them is wrong. And yet somehow when you solve those problems, you're just left with something which is sleek and efficient. And also the other thing is that in the original film, the message was this: violence begets violence and it's all horrible. And somehow in the remake, the message has transmuted slightly into there can be a salvation in violence. And I've got to say that for me, nobody in their right mind would say that watching Last House on the Left was an enjoyable experience. And there's a moment at the end of the remake of Last House on the Left which is a very, very silly moment with a microwave oven, which is very, very silly and clearly should have hit the cutting room floor. But since it's not a fun story, all the stuff that's meant to be horrible is horrible. But I just wonder whether, to me, it's rather like, the time and the place of the original was so much a part of why it was important. And when you decontextualize it and turn it into something else, what you do is take away the meaning of it. In the end, Last House wasn't the important thing. It was the time that it happened. And now we just have a nuts. I can't say that I would advise anybody. So it's not like I'm going to say, well, don't go and see the original. Go and get go and get the original on DVD, because it's such an unpleasant watch, but it's an important unpleasant watch. And what the remake is,
I don't want to watch that though.
No, I know you don't. And I'm
I don't
as
want
I said,
something that's important.
No, I'm not. But the
unpleasant.
thing is, the remake I don't think even is important. That's not to say it's badly made. I think it's well made, and I think they've done a decent job of it. But I just think it's pointless.